So Martin Fowler says, any fool can write code that a computer can understand. Good programmers write code that humans can understand. Uncle Bob, Robert Martin, says, indeed, the ratio of time spent reading versus writing is well over 10 to 1. We are constantly reading old code as part of the effort to write new code. Therefore, making it easy to read makes it easier to write. So if our job is to read code, and if it's that important, it should be pretty important to us, and it should be a crucial task for us to be giving our code a voice. And so that's what I want to talk about. And so I'm going to go through these 6 things and talk about giving our code a voice, helping our code to speak clearly, making it more readable, all of those things. So number 1, avoiding meaningless words. We'll talk about that. Striving for consistency, not making my brain hurt, naming according to scope. We'll figure out what I mean by that. Don't make me look things up if you can help it, and leverage metaphors. So let's dive in. Number 1, avoid meaningless words. So these are snooze words, the variable names that put my brain in snooze mode. The king of useless words, in my opinion, is data. So this is the word that I reach for when I need another word for stuff or things. Like, I just need a variable name. What do I call it? Data, of course. So take a look at this code snippet. There's a little bit cut off, but just soak it in for 1 sec. Here we have data equals some data. In this case, it actually is kind of data. And we have some API. We're calling on an endpoint, and we're passing this over to that endpoint. And so this is fine, but I think we can do a little bit better. So here I use data just as a catch-all. So take a look at this and see if is there any word that you could use instead of data that might describe the scenario a little bit better, and at least just jog a brain. So I picked payload. Payload is incrementally better, in my opinion. It says a little bit more about what the thing is doing. You're shipping it up, you're packaging it up to then send it over to a server. Another example is items. This is another common useless word that I use all the time for like, I need some things. What do I call it? Items. So when you come across this and you find yourself using items, ask yourself, what are the items? What are the things? And then name it that. So in this case, they're nav links. Get nav links. Call them links. It's completely fine. So a quick note, the more abstracted your code is, in other words, the farther away from business lingo and business logic, the more permissible these names are going to be. So sometimes it will make sense to use data and items and result and things like that. But the farther you are away from the business code, the more permissible that becomes. Type suffixing. So here, suffixing, we have a names array. So this is a common thing you see people do. Something string, something array. Programmers can infer type generally. If it's names, I know it's a list of things. It's names. It's an array. So just drop the array. It's a little more clear to me. It wakes my brain up. It says names. Another example: created at timestamp. Created at implies that some sense of time. So timestamp becomes redundant. So just drop it. Now we just have created at. Hungarian notation. So this is kind of cut off. But there's a letter before every variable that says its type. And not only does it say its type, it says it in an abbreviation, a terse one. And so when you use this in object-oriented languages, everything's like O something, because everything's an object. Like if you use this in Ruby, it would be O something. It just becomes more and more useless. But to me, it's added distraction. It's cruft. Drop it, give me the name. Names, name, age, I know what they are. I know it's a number, I know it's a string. So here I have a mail service. And service to me, if I ask myself, what is a service? What does service mean? To me, it does a thing, or it like does something. And classes do stuff. So I can get rid of service. And it's something that I find myself, I just pop in service when I can't think of a pattern name or I can't think of a good name. So challenge yourself to drop service. So let's just drop it, and now we get mailer. So instead of mail service, it reads a little better. It's just more plain. It's what it does. It's a mailer. Thing 1 and thing 2. This is a common one. So here I have a test. What's going on here is I set up 2 users, and one of them I'm going to log in, and the other one I'm not, and then I'm going to assert that different things happen, that something happens to one user and not the other. So this is also common, like in tests, if you set up like posts, you set up 3 posts, and they each are different in subtle ways, and then you need to assert that their differences happen in the database or something like that. And you call it post 1, post 2, post 3. Like, who's ever done that? Have you ever named a variable something 1 and something 2 and something 3, right? And then you have this big test or this big list of things, and you can't make sense of it. So see if you can challenge yourself to come up with a variable name that expresses something about its role, especially in testing. And so in this case, we had user1 and user2, and now we have user and visitor. And anywhere throughout this test, I can see the word visitor, and it clicks with me. It goes, oh, this is somebody who doesn't belong. This person should not have access to those authenticated things. All right, number 2, strive for consistency. So in web apps, there's pretty much like, if you're working on a web app, chances are like 80% of your models have some text in them. Like they're a thing that contains text. A tag, a blog, a comment, a testimonial, something like that. They all contain text. And for me, I just kind of pick and choose. It's like word roulette, body, text, content, whatever. And it's usually just the whim at the time I'm creating the model. And then when I go to use the thing, if I go to use the testimonial in a view or something, I have to remember, what was that? Was it content or text? And then I have to go look it up and do all this work. So save me that time, and just pick one and stick with it. So it doesn't really matter what you pick, but just pick one and stick with it. So here I got a blog has a body, a comment has a body, testimonial has a body. They all mean the same thing. All right, image, photo, and thumbnail, also common culprits. Avatar, file name, things like that. Again, words I use almost completely interchangeably, and it's just best to stick one, or pick one and stick with it throughout your app. So here I just pick image. Another example, who's ever seen this? API keys, public keys, secret API secret, public key. It's like you have this, every permutation and combination you can imagine of public keys and secret keys, and I've totally done this in the same app, in the same environment file. Pick 2 that work for you and just stick with them. The important thing here is that you're consistent. API key and API secret, my weapons of choice. Don't make my brain hurt. Easier said than done. It's pretty easy to do. So abbreviations, yeah, abbreviations. These are actually some abbreviations that I'm okay with. These are widely accepted developer abbreviations. Admin, ID, int, EZ, things like that. And then here's something I'm not okay with. When I see these, it ruins my day a little bit. Attr for attribute, opt for options, MSG for Madison Square Garden, or message or something like that. I'd rather see message, attribute, error. And so after I made this slide, I was sort of pondering on why don't I like these things? And after I made the slide, I looked, and so here's the before slide. Look at how thin this column is versus the other column, and then look at this, and the difference is much different. I didn't plan it that way. It just so happened. So I think that's like, it's telling me something like, hey, you're buying a little bit less by using these, and they're not as widely accepted. So just think about what you're buying and how familiar people are with your abbreviations, because they're probably not. Dates. So any sort of date operation, my brain just goes, boom, it's over. I'm tapped out. If it says date M, I get it. That's a month. Date D, day. I don't know what a J is, and I don't know what a T is, and so I get very confused, and then I have to go to php.net and figure it out and look at that same page that I always look at, the date format, guide thing, right? You hear me? Yeah. So stick them in a variable. Do something. Give me words. So here we just assign them to variables. This is not brain surgery. You made 2 extra variables. You added a couple lines, but now I read it like a book. The day of month divided by, make sure this is good, divided by the total days in month. Works perfectly. Here's another nasty one. So this is this was like 2 days ago. I saw this, and I was like, I got to put this into the talk. This is just rough. I have to sit there and look at this and figure out, I can't do it. So in this case, PHP's datetime object and some other datetime classes and other languages do this. You can pass in plain language. This is magical to me. So I can just say, first day of this month at midnight. This is the same exact thing as this. So I almost exclusively use this in my app. So anytime I'm popping up a date, just name it with a sentence. It seems too easy. regex. No. So regex is super powerful. Have you heard? It's ridiculously powerful. I get it. I love it. Just get it out of my face. Like, this is such a simple regex, and I could sit here for 2 minutes and not be able to explain what this does. And half of you are like, really? I can. But I can't. So just get it out of my face. I'm fine with it. Just stick it in a super well-named function. Strip out extra white space. Makes perfect sense. It's great. You can do your regex, just hide it, get it out of my face. Negatives, so exclamation points. So anytime you negate something, so Sandy Metz says she's Boolean impaired. I'm definitely Boolean impaired. If you say not true, I can kind of do that. Like I can do false. I can kind of do that. When you negate a statement or a sentence, my brain explodes. So I have to sit there and I have to think, if not post is expired, that probably means a post is active. And then I have to store that in my brain and then go through the rest of the code and keep that state of things in my brain, and then I lose it and I go back. And it's this cycle. So if you can, if you're negating a statement, see if you can drop it. So we've turned this if not post is expired to if post is active. We've created a happy path. I read it and I go, that makes sense. It's confirmed. Double negatives. So here's one. I'm going to let you sit on that for a second. So this is a common thing, array filters and maps. I think we saw one in a talk earlier. So here I have, so for me to read this out, this is how I have to logically read this to parse this code in my brain. I have to say, I have a pile of users, and I want to filter out all of the users except the ones whose group is not equal to admin, right? Super simple little bit of code. I write this stuff all the time, but if you really just logically say it, it's so hard to wrap my brain around. So if we flip this, look at this filter. We flip it to a reject, which does the opposite of a filter. Watch how I read this. I have a pile of users, and I want to reject all the ones whose group is equal to admin. Reads like a book. It makes perfect sense to me. This, my brain explodes, and it's just a short difference here. So watch out for those double negatives. All right, intermission time. I am standing between you and lunch, and I shouldn't be showing you slides of food, and there is no snack bar, I'm so sorry. I just want to step out, because we've just been example after example after example. Step out, look at the big picture, and how important it is to choose words that mean something, jog a brain, to use happy paths and things, because staring at these complex things all day, there really is a cost to it. I just want to say that I made the slideshow for myself. Like if I sound like I'm preaching to myself. This is stuff that once I did these slides, and then I go back to my day job, I'm referencing them constantly. I'm like, oh, come on, Caleb, you're telling them this, do this, And some of those examples, like that date time one, is literally in a pull request 2 days ago. Like this is stuff that is every single day I'm coming across this or I'm writing it. It's just super applicable. It's super applicable to me, and you're going to help your future self, my future self, the other coders working on your stuff. Just important stuff. All right, so we've made it that far. Number 4, name according to scope. What does that mean? All right, so we have a class called cart, and it has a bunch of functions: add product, remove product, change product. You've probably seen a similar pattern if you work in a front-end framework like React or Vue or Angular, where you have these components, and then you have all these compound method names, and there's this repetition here: add product, remove product, change product, and you might have a whole other set of them. So here, let's refactor this and see if we can change these methods up a little bit. So watch what happens. So I've broken out a separate class called products that now just has add, remove, change, and then cart depends on products. So what we've done here, we've broken out a class that has a little bit more of an isolated scope, isolated responsibilities. So we get shorter method names, and it reads, pretty much just as well: carts, products, add. This is a fascinating thing to me. Your name, so if you follow these naming conventions, if you choose really good names, they can point you in the direction of good code. It's kind of this magical thing where I'm just sitting back and I'm going, my naming fetishes align with good architecture. How cool is that? So if I name my things really well and I'm really responsible about that, it'll point me in the direction. Some smells will come up of architectural changes, because the bigger the scope of your code is, the longer the name will be. Names are typically, they're proportional to the size of the scope. And I think that is such a cool little slider that you can use your names as an indicator for, maybe my scope's a little too big. Maybe I need to size it down a little bit. Here's another example: transaction ID, transaction date, transaction amount. So here we have the repetition before: transaction ID, transaction date, transaction amount. We've seen this in real code. These are littered with there's methods that use them, and then there's 100 other little repetition things. This might be a smell, break out a value object. Another refactoring we can do. We're smelling this repetition in our variable names because they're growing with the scope. You can break it out into a value object that knows things about itself, and maybe you can say transaction amount in cents and other helpful things like that. All right, do not make me look things up. Please, save me the trips to the docs. Just give me what I need right in the code. Really appreciate it. I'm pretty bad at remembering a lot of things. Bare parameters. All right, we have a class color. So color accepts 3 parameters: Can you guess what those would be? We can kind of guess. What would you say that they would be? Somebody yell it out. We're going to try that. RGB, right? Like, but what if it's HSL? Shoot, you know? Like, I just don't have the information to make like an educated guess here. So something that we can do, it's called the static factory method pattern. It's kind of a mouthful. Other people call it named constructors. I like that name a little better. All it is here is you make the constructor of a class private, and then you give it a static method that's in charge of creating itself. And we buy words. And it seems simple, but it's super powerful. So now we say color from RGB, and I know exactly what to pass in. That's perfect. Color from HSL, it's so explicit. It reads so well to me. All right, here we're newing up an HTTP request, and we're passing in 500. This one's a little harder to figure out. What would 500 be? Is that a pagination threshold? Is it the number of requests? It's probably like a timeout, but I'm not sure. In this instance, let's say that you don't own this class and you can't add yourself a static factory or something like that. What do we do here? So this is something that I've been using a little more lately. I call these throwaway variables. This variable serves no other purpose than to give me words. I'm never going to use it. It's a throwaway variable. I pop it in a parameter just to get some words. So now I read this as boot up a new HTTP request and give it a timeout of 500 seconds. It reads so well to me. Boolean flags. I have beef with Boolean flags. Like these are rough. Here's any PHP developer out there knows what I'm talking about with this JSON decode method here. So JSON decode, you pass in the JSON, makes sense, but then there's this true-false bit where depending on if it's true or false, it gives you an array or it gives you an object. And they're two very different things, and we're always using this JSON decode thing, and I never, ever remember. I would be surprised if somebody in here was, oh, I always remember. It's really tough to remember. So yeah, here's a great example. Pop in one of those throwaway variables, return array. It says what it does. Okay, so I'm returning an array. It's great. All right, so here, simple thing, we're fetching a row from a database of a user. So we have a table, users, we fetch a row, and let's say so we fetch that a row, and we get an array of numerical indexes. So we have a row in a numerical indexed array, and then throughout our view, we have user 2, user 1, echo user 3. What does that mean? Nobody knows what that means. So you have to look at the context to figure it out, or dig into the table or something like that. Save me the trip. Give me if you can, get it in an associative array and give me a word. Array indexes are common culprits of this. People don't know what they mean, and you have to reference another thing to figure out what it is. So if you can, get it in an associative array. So here we're fetching a user, we're doing it as an associative array, and now we say echo user email. It's so clear, you know exactly what's happening. Okay, what's going on here? So we have a request. And we submit a request to hopefully create a user, it looks like, because we're posting to this user's endpoint. We pass in a payload, and we get the response. And so here, we're asserting that the status code of the response equals 201. What is a 201 status code? I can never remember those status codes. I got 200, I got 404, but all the ones in between, it's just this blur. And then I have to Google HTTP status codes. Save me the Google. Here's an example of using constants. So I think HTTP status codes are a good example of using constants. Again, 200, 404, I know what that is, a 500, but some of these intermittent ones are a little tougher. So here I create a class HTTP status, and its only job is to contain well-named status codes in constants. So now when I read this code, I say assert equals the status code, or assert equals, this is status code. Make sure the status code equals created. It says what it does. Make sure that a thing gets created. Otherwise, 201 just leaves me hanging. All right, so here we have a post object, and we're publishing it. So we want to publish a post. But let's just pretend that internally, it queues up that publishing job. So it doesn't actually publish right away, but it queues it up. So this is kind of dangerous, because another developer could be using this, and they don't know that functionality. So what can we do here? I'm totally fine with popping an and into a method name. That's fine with me. If you need to do that, queue and publish. Post, queue, and publish. A developer reads this, it's transparent. It says exactly what it does. Here's another one. So this is a post, so you know. We have a post class, and then we have a get first method on the post class. And so what this does is we have a posts table, and we want to get the first one, right? But let's just say that the post table is empty. And if you can't find a first one, what would you anticipate to happen? Give me the first row in a table. Oops, there's no first row. I would guess that it would return null or false, some sort of error state maybe. But let's just pretend that internally, instead of returning null or false, it creates a row. It creates a new post. That's kind of unintended behavior. Again, a little risky, and something that I would have to dig into the code myself to figure out. So save me that dig, and pop in an or. Here's another example. These ands and ors can be super handy in method names. Post get first or create, or get first or fail, something like that. All right, and lastly, leverage metaphors. What are these things? So in design, designers use metaphors all the time. And this is going back to a little bit of what Chris was saying with affordances and real-life affordances. And it's a perfect example. So this is a design metaphor. Designers use button as a metaphor because humans know what to do with a button. If I presented you with a button, you would know what to do. You would press it. Buttons are for pressing. So designers leverage that human experience so that in an app, they don't have to teach you a new interaction. You know, I click this thing. This is great. So this type of design is called skeuomorphism, like Apple used to use it, where things are metal and leather and stuff like that. It's becoming less popular. But I think it's a good testament to affordances and design metaphors. So let's talk about metaphors in programming. How can we apply that? Mary Oliver, when talking about metaphors in figurative language, says, this transfer of some quality of the known to the unknown is like a beam of light. We see, that is, we understand, something about the unknown in light of the known. There's a lot of knowns and unknowns here, but say the known is the button and the unknown is the interface. We see it in the light of the known. We get free information by leveraging that experience. How can we bring that into our code? So here we have admin login as other user. So you have a web app, and you have to create an administrative dashboard for your web app so that people can field customer service requests, and then they do this thing where they can search up the email of the problematic user, log in as them, and repeat the problem. Super handy. Everybody who's built a web app has probably made an admin dashboard where you do this. So it's a pattern. But login as other user, it reads well. It says what it does, but it's a little verbose, and you're going to have these different arrangements of this statement throughout your code. Admin is logging in as other user somewhere, and then you might have user is being logged in by admin, something like that. So you have these different permutations and combinations. It gets a little hard to keep track. So let's see if we can come up with a metaphor that's short and sweet, and we can leverage that experience. Impersonate. I love this. I love it when I see this. As soon as I found this, I was like, oh, this is beautiful. So now I can just say an admin impersonates a user. We're pulling on that experience that humans have. We know what an imposter is. And it's such a good analogy here for what's going on, this pattern in an application. And so now we have impersonate. We also have imposter and is impersonated and is being impersonated. These new words. It's a new concept. Another one, in APIs, let's say that you build an API and you want an endpoint for the user to get the currently authenticated user stuff, right? You don't want to have to remember the user ID. So we need some helper where a user can just give me an endpoint user / the currently authenticated one, right? That gets you back, right? So some people know where I'm getting. There's a metaphor that's 2 letters that does a really good job of connecting that with your brain. Me, yeah. So Facebook uses this in the Graph API. It's become kind of a common pattern. But once I started digging into metaphors and looking for them, I thought, oh, this is actually a metaphor because me isn't a technical term at all. It's just me. And when I read this, I go, users, me. Probably going to get the currently authenticated one, So you're getting free meaning from these words by leveraging that experience. All right, so we've come a long way. Avoid meaningless words. Drop the datas and the items and the results and things like that if you can. The farther you are away from the business logic, you can get away with it, but just ask yourself, make sure you've answered that question. What is the thing, right? Number 2, strive for consistency if you can. Avoid the whim of the day. Pick a word, stick with it. It'll help you. It'll help your friends. Number 3, don't make my brain hurt if you can. I'm Boolean impaired. The exclamation points, double exclamation points, the filters, the knots, the this and that, it just jumbles up my brain and I have to read it out slowly. So if you can, help me out, make it a little easier. Number 4, name according to scope. So scope changes, or I should say names change as scope grows and shrinks. Use that as a smell. Use it as a pointer that maybe there's something in my code that deserves a more isolated set of responsibilities. Number 5, don't make me look things up. If you can, avoid my trip to php.net. I'm there all the time. Save me a trip. Use things like constants, variables. Help me out. Number 6, leverage metaphors. If you can, you get free meaning. It's for free. Humans already have these experiences, and you can pull on them. So see if there's apt metaphors in your code for common patterns. They're a ton of fun to think up. And now that you're looking for it, things like Chrome's incognito mode, incognito is a metaphor. You'll start noticing this constantly, like all these things are metaphors. File, that was a great example. Files are metaphors. All right. Choosing words is fun and creative. It is a ton of fun. This is most of what I love about programming. It's kind of a joke. Like, I just love naming things. I picked the hardest thing to love. But really, like, it's a fun, great experience. I'm not saying I'm that good at it, but I find, and once you kind of internalize how much you can help yourself and other people by naming things well, by structuring your code in such a way that it reads really clearly, it's just a ton of fun. It's a great experience. Our job is to listen and understand the code that we write and others write. So let's write code that speaks. Thank you.